Good evening. My name is Terry Province, and I'm the Executive Director for Oiko Credit USA, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join us tonight because you are one of hundreds of people across the United States from Boston to San Francisco who are joining us as we begin our Summer of Microfinance with house parties tonight in order to learn more about our organization, Oiko Credit, and what you and we together can do to alleviate poverty. Now, I will recognize that poverty is not a fun thing to talk about, and particularly on a Friday evening when we're also wanting to enjoy ourselves, it may seem a little distractive, but it's the reason why we are here. Unfortunately, billions of people the world over live in the unjust and economic trap and prison of miserable poverty on a daily basis. Lack of potable and drinkable water, illiteracy, vulnerability to diseases, death from hunger are the everyday realities of billions of people the world over. A lot of people think that that's their fault, that they chose and made decisions that created this poverty for them. But that is a little too simple for a lot of us to say. First of all, much of this poverty has been created by the exploitation of people and resources from corporations and governments and nations from the industrialized North. And therefore we, you, me, those of us living here in the United States have a particular responsibility. It's also important to end poverty because it's a way of improving peace and security. As Mahatma Gandhi said from India in 1946, poverty is the worst form of violence. People who are hopeless and desperate because they live in economic injustice and in the conditions of poverty may be more tempted to use radical means to address their conditions. And that is why Muhammad Yunus, who established the Grameen Microcredit Bank in Bangladesh, received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006 because reducing poverty goes a long way to improving the peace and security of all of the world's people. Another reason to end poverty is because it will help improve the environment. People who are more educated about pesticides and about damaging the water table, about carbon footprint and emissions, and who learn about alternatives for more efficient and less global impacting products will help us to create an environment that is more sustainable, not only for us, but for generations to come. I think the inhumanity of poverty calls upon all of us to measure our own humanity to make sure that we do something about this injustice, and that is why Oiko Credit was formed in 1975. Oiko Credit, 35 years ago, began its mission of reducing poverty by making loans to poor people for income-generating purposes so that they can take one or two steps up the ladder out of economic injustice and live more dignified and respectful lives. We get the money to do this from socially responsible investors from around the world, for which we ask you for your consideration as well. Today, Oiko Credit is one of the largest microfinance funds in the world. Our fund of almost $650 million supports 800 microcredit and cooperative projects in 71 countries. And during that entire time, our investors have been satisfied with annual interest, redemption of their principal, and knowing that the social performance of our organization is going a long way to improve the conditions for poor people. Small loans to poor people for income-generating purposes. Now let me first say that microcredit is not the panacea for ending poverty. Microcredit has its place and is a part of the puzzle to help end poverty, but much more needs to be done. So let's be realistic about that. First of all, many third world countries have been forced into immoral debts, and those debts must be forgiven. Corporations have free reign around the world through what they call free trade, and free trade has to become fair trade so that the playing field is level. Corporations need to be more regulated and reined in, and the North still gives relatively little of its wealth and resources to people in the South. All of that needs to happen, and all of that will take a global and coordinated movement before it reaches its goals. But poor people cannot wait until that happens. Poor people can actually do something to lift themselves out of poverty with your support. Poor people can do something to end their own economic poverty with loans. And that's really the miracle, if you will, of microcredit. Instead of giving poor people donations or gifts or contributions, the new thing about microcredit is giving poor people a loan. A loan that they cannot get from commercial banks because they don't qualify with assets and collateral. They simply don't have any to guarantee a commercial bank. Or they're subjected to street predators and loan sharks who really benefit themselves and not poor people. Poor people can do more with credit than a donation. If somebody is donating to poor people and they stop giving to that poor person, the poor person has nowhere to go. If a poor person has a loan and keeps paying on that loan, it can participate. The poor person can participate in their own economic determination, their own economic livelihood, their own economic realities by sustainable business through ongoing credit. Credit is much more powerful for poor people than donations, and that is why poor people are so credit worthy. There's a stereotype, a mythology about poor people, that they're lazy, that they're unimaginative, that they're not creative, that they've created these conditions for themselves. When poor people are given credit, when we invest in people, poor people can do a lot to bring themselves out of the injustice of poverty, and that's why we make loans to poor people. Yes, there are roles for donations and foundations to contribute, but the new thing about microcredit is actually giving credit to poor people, or as Muhammad Yunus says, it's a human right to have credit, and it should be on fair and just terms. So maybe we can take a look at what it means to invest in people.